B. Me Lewis, 28. My job is at a materials recovery facility, a fancy name for a giant building that smells like the world's biggest trash can. You get used to the smell mostly. Some days it's just damp cardboard. Other days it's the ghost of a million sour milk cartons. The pay is good because nobody with a fancy degree wants to work here. My corner of this little kingdom is the heavy machinery section. The floor here vibrates all day long. You have the baler, a 10-ton hydraulic press that turns mountains of plastic and metal into neat, dense cubes. There's the industrial shredder, a monster that eats anything from old tires to washing machines, and a whole network of conveyor belts, screens, and magnetic separators that move tons of material every hour. It's loud, it's dirty, and if you're not paying attention, it's dangerous. But it's a straightforward job. Respect the machines, and they'll do the work for you. My crew was just two other guys. First, there was Rocky. Rocky was in his 50s, had a face like a road map, and hands that looked like they were carved out of oak. He was the lead mechanic and senior operator. The guy could diagnose a problem with a sorting machine just by the pitch of the whine it was making. He'd been there for probably 20 years. He knew every bolt, every fuse, every hydraulic line in the building. He didn't talk much, didn't need to. When he did speak, it was to say something important. So you listened. Then there was Beckham, a young guy, maybe 22, built like a brick house and had more energy than a puppy. He was learning the ropes, mostly helping Rocky with maintenance and running the loader. Good kid. Worked hard, didn't complain, and had a healthy fear of the machinery, which is the best way to stay safe. We were a good team. We kept the heart of the plant beating. If our section went down, the whole place went down. Trucks would back up for miles. On the other side of the plant was the light sorting line. It was a much quieter, cleaner area. A long, slow-moving conveyor belt where people stood in a line, picking out specific items by hand, mostly plastic bottles, paper, and cardboard. The work wasn't easy. It was repetitive, but it was safe. You couldn't get seriously hurt on the light line unless you tried really, really hard. Most of the people on that line were women. It was never an official policy, just the way things shook out over the years. People found the job that suited them, and they stuck with it. Things worked. There was a natural rhythm to the place. We'd clock in, have a quick chat about what needed attention that day, and get to work. We kept the heavy stuff running. They sorted the light stuff. At the end of the shift, we'd clock out, maybe share a nod, and go home. A functional system built on competence and common sense. It was too good to last, of course. The change started subtly. 2 new hires on the light line, Reagan and Gabriella. They were different from the other ladies, who were mostly just there to do their job and get a paycheck. You could tell Reagan and Gabriella thought this job was beneath them. They'd spend more time whispering to each other than actually sorting. Lots of eye-rolling and loud, theatrical sighs. They had this air about them, like they were anthropologists studying some primitive tribe. At first, we just ignored them. It's a big plant, easy enough to keep to yourself. But then the comments started during our shared break times, little things at first. One afternoon, me, Rocky, and Beckham were sitting at a table, eating lunch. Rocky was quietly explaining to Beckham why the main conveyor belt's motor was running hot. He was talking about the bearing alignment and the need to check the lubrication schedule. It was just a normal work conversation. From the other side of the room, Reagan loudly remarked to Gabriella that it must be nice to have a secret boys' club where they use big, complicated words to feel important. We all just looked over. Rocky didn't even blink. He just took a bite of his sandwich. Beckham looked confused. I just shook my head and went back to my food. But it was like they'd found a crack, and now they were determined to pry it open. A week or so later, our shift manager calls all 3 of us into his office. The manager was a guy who was terrified of conflict. His main goal in life was to get through the day without anyone raising their voice. He sat behind his desk, looking nervous. He told us a complaint had been filed, an official, written complaint to HR. The complaint was about us. It claimed that our team was fostering a non-inclusive environment and creating an intimidating atmosphere for female colleagues. I remember just staring at him, trying to process it. We barely even talked to them. The manager explained that the complaint mentioned our use of exclusionary technical language in common areas. It also mentioned how we didn't socialize or integrate with the rest of the staff during breaks. We were being accused of being a clique. Rocky finally spoke. His voice was calm and flat. He asked the manager if there was a complaint about our work, about our performance, about our safety record. The manager stammered and said no, of course not. Our work was excellent. But he insisted that the cultural aspect of the workplace was also very important. He told us we needed to be more mindful and approachable. We walked out of that office in silence. Beckham was furious. He kept saying it was unbelievable. Rocky just walked back to the workshop, picked up a wrench, and went back to work on the motor he'd been talking about. That was his answer to everything. Just do the work. But things were different after that. There was a new tension in the air. Reagan and Gabriella now walked around with an air of victory. They had the manager's ear. They had HR on their side. They had power. The next step came a few weeks later. An email went out to everyone. Mandatory staff meeting. The meeting was in the main sorting hall, and an HR representative was there. She was a woman in a crisp pantsuit who looked completely out of place next to a mountain of crushed tin cans. She had a laptop and a projector. For the next hour, we were subjected to a presentation on workplace harmony and psychological safety. It was death by 1,000 corporate buzzwords. We saw slides with stock photos of smiling, diverse teams high-fiving each other. We were told about the importance of avoiding unconscious bias and microaggressions. One of the examples of a microaggression was correcting a female colleague's work in a public setting. It was described as a form of mansplaining. I looked over at Rocky. He had his arms crossed and was staring at a spot on the wall behind the HR lady's head. He hadn't moved a muscle in 20 minutes. At the end, there was a Q&A session. Gabriella's hand shot up. She asked, with a very serious look on her face, what the official procedure was if a male colleague displayed toxic masculinity by refusing to acknowledge his privilege. The HR rep gave a long, rambling answer about opening a dialogue and fostering mutual understanding. It was clear she was just reading from a script. The whole thing felt like a scene from a bizarre play. After that meeting, the atmosphere got even worse. Reagan and Gabriella felt empowered. They started nitpicking everything. They complained that the cleaning duties for the break room weren't being shared equally, even though we always cleaned up our own mess. They complained that the vending machine was stocked with snacks that catered to male appetites. Each complaint was treated with the utmost seriousness by the manager. We just tried to keep our heads down. We'd eat our lunch in the workshop, away from the main break room. We'd only talk about work, and we'd do it quietly, next to our machines. We were just trying to avoid trouble. But they didn't want to be avoided. They wanted a confrontation. They wanted to prove a point. Their grand plan was revealed about a month after the HR meeting. Reagan and Gabriella, along with two of their friends from the Light Line, Irene and Mackenzie, submitted a formal proposal to the manager and HR. It was a multi-page document, full of corporate jargon they'd clearly picked up from the seminar. The proposal was titled, "A Proposal for a More Equitable and Just Distribution of Labor." The core idea was simple. They claimed that the current informal division of labor was a systemic, patriarchal injustice. The fact that men worked with the heavy machinery while women worked on the light line was, according to them, a form of gender-based segregation. It reinforced harmful stereotypes and denied women the opportunity to gain valuable technical skills. Their solution was a mandatory job rotation. Everyone, regardless of experience, physical ability, or interest, would have to rotate through every job in the plant. One week you're sorting paper, the next week you're operating the hydraulic baler. They called it skill leveling and opportunity equalization. I thought it was the most insane idea I had ever heard. It wasn't just stupid, it was dangerous. Operating the shredder or the baler required training, experience, and a constant awareness of your surroundings. You couldn't just read a manual and figure it out. You needed to develop a feel for the machines. You needed to know the sounds, the smells, the vibrations that meant something was wrong. Putting a complete novice in charge of a 10-ton press was a recipe for disaster. The manager called us in again. This time the HR rep was there too. They showed us the proposal. Rocky read it. He didn't change his expression, but I could see a muscle twitching in his jaw. He put the papers down on the desk. He told the manager, in his usual quiet tone, that this plan was unsafe. He explained that the machinery requires hundreds of hours of supervised training to operate competently. He pointed out that our insurance and safety certifications were probably contingent on having trained operators. He wasn't being emotional. He was just stating facts. The HR rep spoke up. She said that the company was committed to providing equal opportunities for all employees. She mentioned that they would provide adequate training materials and peer support. Reagan and Gabriella had apparently already volunteered to be the first to rotate into the heavy machinery section. They saw it as breaking a glass ceiling. The manager wouldn't look us in the eye. He just kept shuffling papers. He said his hands were tied. The proposal was framed as an issue of fairness and equality. If he rejected it, the company could be exposed to a discrimination lawsuit. And the one thing corporate feared more than anything was a lawsuit. So, the plan was approved. A new weekly schedule was posted on the main bulletin board the following Friday. It was happening. That Monday morning felt different. The air was thick with a kind of nervous energy. Our new assignments were, as expected, on the light sorting line. Me, Rocky, and Beckham, standing shoulder to shoulder with the other sorters, picking plastic bottles off a conveyor belt. And down in the heavy machinery section, Reagan was assigned to the industrial shredder, and Gabriella was at the control panel for the baler. They were given a quick 30-minute walkthrough by the shift supervisor, who was just as nervous as the manager. They were handed laminated instruction sheets, and then they were left to it. It didn't take long for things to go wrong. The work on the light line was mind-numbingly dull. After years of working with complex machinery, standing still while a slow stream of trash passed in front of you was a special kind of torture. Rocky was next to me. He was methodical, picking off bottles with an efficiency that was almost robotic. But his eyes kept drifting towards the baler. About an hour into the shift, we heard a loud clang from that direction, followed by a sharp yell. The whole plant seemed to hold its breath. We saw Gabriella jump back from the control panel of the baler. The massive steel plate, which was supposed to compress the material slowly, had dropped half a foot in a sudden jerky motion. If someone's hand had been in there, it would be gone. Beckham, without thinking, vaulted over the short barrier separating the lines and ran to the emergency stop button, slamming his hand down on it. The machine hissed and went silent. Gabrielle immediately started shouting at him. She wasn't scared or relieved. She was angry. She accused him of undermining her and treating her like she was incompetent. She yelled that she had it under control. Beckham just stood there, shocked. He'd just prevented a serious accident, maybe even saved her from injury, and he was being screamed at. The manager came running over, saw the scene, and his face went pale. He weakly told Beckham to get back to his station. No thank you. No acknowledgement of what he'd done, just an order to walk away. Meanwhile, on the other side, Reagan was having her own problems with the shredder. The shredder is a beast, but it's also sensitive. You have to feed it material at a steady pace. You can't just dump a whole container in at once. Reagan, in her infinite wisdom, had a loader operator dump an entire bin of tangled industrial textiles into the hopper. The machine started to groan. The sound was ugly, a deep grinding protest from the motor as it struggled with the massive, tangled lump. Then came the high-pitched squeal of the clutch slipping, a sound that always meant expensive trouble. Someone hit the kill switch. The shredder was completely jammed, a job that would take hours of dirty, difficult work to clear. The entire processing line that fed off the shredder came to a halt. The manager walked over, looking like he was about to cry. He looked at the mess. He looked at Reagan. She just shrugged. She said it wasn't her fault. The machine was clearly defective. She also added that she wasn't going to climb into that filthy hopper to clear it. She said it was a safety hazard and not in her job description. Of course, clearing jams was in the job description for the operator. Our job description. So, the manager came over to us, the three guys standing by the bottle line. He asked if one of us could go and clear the shredder. Rocky didn't even look at him. Beckham was still fuming from his encounter with Gabriella. So I sighed and said I'd do it. It took me 2.5 hours. 2.5 hours of pulling out greasy, tangled, and sharp-edged junk from the guts of the machine. While I worked, Reagan stood nearby with her arms crossed, watching me. She didn't offer to help. She just watched, as if I were her personal servant. When I was finally done, covered in grime and sweat, she didn't say thank you. She just said it was about time, because her workflow was being held up. That was the end of day one. It had been a complete and utter disaster. Production for the day was down by over 60%. 2 major pieces of equipment had been mishandled, one of them nearly causing a serious accident. And the atmosphere had gone from tense to openly hostile. We thought maybe, just maybe, that would be the end of it. That management would see that the experiment had failed and go back to the old system. We were wrong. That would have been an admission of error, and they would never, ever admit they were wrong. The next day, we were back on the light line. The company had to bring in an emergency repair crew to fix the shredder. It cost a fortune, but the rotation policy wasn't even questioned. Instead, Reagan and Gabriella wrote a formal incident report. In their report, the problem wasn't their incompetence. It was the inadequate and outdated machinery and a lack of proper gender-inclusive training. They claimed the control panels were designed for male hands and the safety warnings were written in an aggressively masculine tone. I don't even know what that means. Management ate it up. They promised to look into upgrading the equipment and redesigning the training modules. It was like living in an alternate reality where cause and effect had ceased to exist. The following week, the new schedule came out. They were still on the heavy machinery. We were still picking bottles. The farce continued. Things kept breaking. Not in big, dramatic ways like the first day, but in 1,000 small, expensive ways. Fuses would blow because a machine was being run improperly. Safety sensors would get tripped constantly, leading to dozens of small shutdowns every shift. The hydraulic systems started making noises Rocky had never let them make. Every time something went wrong, it was the same story. The machine's fault. The manual's fault. The fault of the men who had improperly maintained them for years. It was a direct shot at Rocky, but he never reacted. He just did his job on the light line with quiet, painstaking precision. He was the best bottle sorter in the history of the plant. Beckham and I tried to follow his lead. We showed up on time. We did the work we were assigned. We didn't complain. But the morale was gone. We barely talked anymore. What was there to say? We were just watching the slow, deliberate destruction of a place that, for all its flaws, had once been a well-oiled machine. The other workers saw it too. The loaders, the truck drivers, the other women on the light line. Nobody said anything out loud, but you could see it in their eyes. Everyone was just waiting for the whole thing to collapse. The breaking point came about a month into the new regime. Maybe 6 weeks. It's all a blur of tedium now. It was a Tuesday, I think. The plant was under pressure. We had a huge backlog because of all the shutdowns, and a major client was getting impatient. The manager was running around, sweating and stressed. Gabriella was at the controls of the main sorting conveyor. This conveyor was the artery of the entire plant. Everything flowed through it. It was a massive, complex piece of machinery with dozens of interlocking parts. It was also notoriously finicky. Rocky used to have a sixth sense about it. He could hear a bearing starting to go a week before it failed. We heard the sound first, a high-pitched, metallic scream. It was a sound that made every experienced worker on the floor freeze. It was the sound of metal being tortured. Then came a loud, percussive bang, like a gunshot, that echoed through the entire building. The main conveyor shuddered to a violent halt. Red warning lights flashed everywhere. Alarms started blaring. Silence fell over the plant floor, broken only by the wail of the alarms. Everything had stopped. The manager sprinted over to the control panel, his face ashen. Gabriella was just standing there, hands in the air, with a look of complete shock on her face. She kept saying, "I didn't do anything. It just stopped." A maintenance supervisor came over and looked at the situation. He shook his head. A main drive shaft had seized and sheared clean off. It was a catastrophic failure. The supervisor said it would take a specialized crane to even lift the damaged parts out. It would be a minimum of 2 days to fix, probably 3, if they could even get the parts. The plant was dead in the water. The manager looked like he was going to be physically sick. You could almost see the dollar signs draining from his eyes, thousands of dollars in losses for every hour of downtime. While everyone was panicking, Rocky acted. He had been standing at his spot on the light line, watching. He put down the plastic bottle he was holding. He walked over to the silent, broken conveyor. He didn't run. He just walked with a steady, deliberate pace. He ignored the manager, who was babbling into his radio. He ignored Gabriella, who started to say something to him, but stopped. He walked the length of the conveyor, his eyes scanning every inch of it. Then he knelt down and peered into the guts of the machine, into the place where the drive shaft had snapped. He was there for maybe a minute. Then he stood up and walked over to a large, unmarked metal cabinet bolted to a nearby wall. It was a maintenance locker that nobody had opened in years. Rocky pulled a ring of old keys from his pocket, found the right one, and unlocked it. Inside was a collection of heavy, specialized tools, relics from an older era of the plant. He took out a huge, custom-made wrench and a long steel bar. He walked back to the machine. He looked at me and Beckham. He just nodded his head once, a silent command. We knew what he wanted. We went over to help him. For the next 20 minutes, Rocky didn't say a word. He just worked. He used the steel bar to manually pry a release clutch that wasn't in any of the modern safety manuals. It was a feature of the older design that only he knew about. This took the pressure off the seized shaft. Then, with me and Beckham helping to brace it, he used the giant wrench to engage a secondary emergency motor that was designed to limp the conveyor to a maintenance position. It was a procedure that was so old it had been literally painted over on the side of the machine. But Rocky knew it was there. With a low groan, the giant conveyor moved, just a few feet, but it was enough. The jam was cleared. The sheared shaft was now in a position where it could be replaced without a crane. What would have been a 3-day, $50,000 repair job, he had just turned into a 6-hour fix. He put the tools back in the cabinet, locked it, and put the keys back in his pocket. He walked back to his spot on the light line and picked up another plastic bottle, as if nothing had happened. The entire plant floor had been watching in dead silence. You could feel the collective sigh of relief. The manager came over, stammering his thanks, but Reagan and Gabriella were not relieved. They were furious. Their faces were masks of pure indignation. In that moment, Rocky hadn't just fixed a machine. He had single-handedly, and without a single word, demolished the entire narrative they had so carefully built. He had proven that experience, skill, and competence were real things that couldn't be replaced by a seminar or a proposal. He had shown everyone who was valuable and who was not, and they could not let that stand. The next morning, the three of us were called into the main office. The big boss from corporate was there. The plant manager, the HR rep, and Reagan and Gabriella sitting there looking like righteous crusaders. This time, it was serious. A formal safety violation report had been filed against Rocky by Reagan and Gabriella. They claimed that he had operated heavy machinery without authorization, that he had bypassed mandatory lockout, tag-out safety procedures, that he had created an unimaginably hazardous situation by manually engaging the drive system. They said his reckless and arrogant display had endangered everyone on the floor. Every word was a deliberate twist of the truth. The corporate boss, who only understood things in terms of liability and regulations, looked at the report. He turned to Rocky. He asked him one question. Did you follow the documented safety protocol for a main drive failure? Rocky just looked at him. He said, No, there is no protocol for that. I fixed it. The HR rep spoke up. She said that if there is no protocol, then no action should be taken without consulting a certified technician and a safety officer. She said his actions, while well-intentioned, exposed the company to massive legal and insurance risks. The manager just sat there, silent, a complete coward. It was a kangaroo court. The verdict was already decided. Rocky was being punished for his competence. He was being punished for saving them. The corporate boss slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was an official, formal, written warning, a black mark on a 20-year unblemished record. Rocky looked at the paper. He didn't look angry. He didn't look sad. He looked tired. He looked at the manager. He looked at the HR rep. Then his eyes settled on Reagan and Gabriella for a long moment. He didn't say a single word. He stood up, turned his back on them, and walked out of the office. That was the last time any of us ever saw him at the plant. The next morning, his locker was empty. His tools were gone. His work boots were gone. He hadn't quit. He hadn't been fired. He had just vanished. When I saw that empty locker, a profound sense of clarity washed over me. This wasn't a place you could fix. This wasn't a battle you could win by working harder or being better. The system was designed to reward the loud and incompetent and punish the quiet and skilled. The game was rigged, so the only winning move was not to play. I walked into the manager's office during my lunch break and handed him my 2-week notice. I didn't give a reason. I didn't need to. Beckham quit the next day. The manager begged us to stay. He offered us more money. He promised things would get better. But we knew they wouldn't. The pillar was gone. The foundation had crumbled. We were just leaving before the roof caved in. Our last 2 weeks were surreal. Reagan and Gabriella were declared heroes by HR for upholding safety standards. They were permanently assigned as co-leads of the heavy machinery section. They walked around like they owned the place, and the place started to die. It started with the small things. A pneumatic line blew on the baler. Nobody knew how to fix it. A sorting screen got clogged. Nobody knew how to clear it properly, so they just turned it off. One by one, the complex systems that Rocky had maintained with such care began to fail. Without his constant preventative maintenance, the entropy was setting in. They tried to hire new mechanics, But experienced people would take one look at the state of the equipment and the management culture and walk right back out. The new hires they could get were fresh out of trade school and had no idea how to handle machinery that old and customized. By the time my last day came, the plant was a shadow of its former self. The constant rhythmic hum of production had been replaced by a sputtering, intermittent limp. Mountains of unprocessed waste were piling up in the yard. The place smelled of failure. I clocked out for the last time, walked to my car, and didn't look back. About 6 months went by. I had a new job at a different company. It was smaller, cleaner, and run by people who actually understood the work they were doing. It was a breath of fresh air. One afternoon, I was at a supply depot picking up some parts, and I saw a familiar truck. It was one of the haulage drivers who used to service the old plant. I went over and said hello. We chatted for a bit, and then I asked him how things were going at the old place. He just started laughing. Not a little chuckle, but a deep rolling laugh that made him shake. When he finally caught his breath, he told me the whole story. A few weeks after I left, things went from bad to terminal. They had a series of catastrophic breakdowns, one after another. They lost their biggest municipal contract, a deal that was worth millions, because they couldn't meet the processing quotas. Corporate headquarters finally sent in a team of auditors to figure out why their most profitable plant had suddenly become a black hole of money. The auditors were not like the HR people. They were ruthless accountants and engineers. They took one look at the production numbers, the maintenance logs, and the incident reports, and the picture became crystal clear. The shift manager was fired on the spot for gross mismanagement. The HR rep was reassigned to a branch in the middle of nowhere. And Reagan and Gabriella? They were both fired for incompetence. The auditor's report apparently detailed, in excruciating detail, how every major failure and production loss for the past 3 months could be traced directly back to their actions. The driver told me the entire heavy machinery section was shut down. The company couldn't fix the mess, so they just amputated the limb. They outsourced all their heavy sorting to a third-party specialist company. The driver paused, a grin spreading across his face. He said, "You know who the site foreman is for that new company? The guy running the whole show?" I already knew the answer, but I let him say it. It's Rocky. He's making almost double his old salary, and he has a whole crew that actually respects him. I just smiled and nodded. We shook hands, and I went on my way. I thought about it on the drive home. Some people think victory is about winning the argument, about shouting louder than the other person. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is just walk away. You don't engage in the drama. You don't fight the madness. You just quietly remove your competence from the equation, and you let the system they created collapse under the weight of its own absurdity. It's a quiet victory, but it's the most satisfying one there is.